crowded marketplace in Athens, more than 2,500 years ago. The air is filled with shouts of merchants, the smell of bread fresh from the ovens, and the sound of sandals scraping over stone. Yet, in one corner, a group of men gathers not to trade, but to speak, to argue, to decide the future of their city. They are not kings, not emperors, not nobles, but ordinary citizens. And what they are about to do is revolutionary. They are creating something the world has never seen before: democracy. But how did a small collection of city-states in ancient Greece invent an idea that still shapes our world today? And more importantly, why did it survive through centuries of empires, wars, and revolutions to become the foundation of modern governments? To answer that, we must travel back to Athens in the 5th century BCE. The city was thriving, wealthy from trade, proud of its culture, and confident in its power. Yet its people had seen enough of tyrants, kings, and aristocrats. They wanted something different. They wanted a system where power didn't belong to one man, but to the people themselves. And so, Athens began to experiment. Here, democracy was born not as a polished system, but as a bold experiment in freedom and equality. Citizens gathered in the ecclesia, the great assembly, where every free male Athenian had the right to stand, speak, and vote. Imagine thousands gathered under the open sky, raising their hands to decide on laws, war, taxes, and justice. It was messy, loud, and often chaotic, but it was also groundbreaking. The Athenians believed that a good citizen was not someone who sat quietly, but someone who participated. To serve in public life was not only a privilege, it was a duty. They even introduced lotteries to select officials, ensuring that power didn't rest in the hands of a few elites. Of course, their democracy wasn't perfect. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded. By today's standards, it was far from fair. But compared to the monarchies and empires of the ancient world, it was a daring step toward a new idea that ordinary people had the right to govern themselves. But why Athens? Why here, and not in Persia, or Egypt, or Rome? The answer lies partly in Greece's geography. Scattered among mountains and seas, Greek city-states grew independently, each developing its own identity. There was no single king powerful enough to dominate them all. In Athens, this freedom of thought and competition bred innovation not just in politics, but in philosophy, art, science, and literature. Democracy was part of this culture of questioning and debate. And debate they did. Figures like Pericles stood before the assembly, speaking with eloquence about freedom and civic duty. Philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle argued over what democracy meant. Was it the rule of the people or the rule of the mob? Could it bring justice or chaos? Their ideas still echo in classrooms and parliaments today. One of the most fascinating parts of Athenian democracy was how deeply it connected to everyday life. Court cases weren't decided by a handful of judges, but by massive juries, sometimes hundreds of citizens at once. Politics wasn't distant, it was personal. If you were a citizen, you weren't just allowed to participate, you were expected to. But here's where things get interesting. If democracy was so groundbreaking, why didn't it spread immediately across the world? The truth is, it was fragile. Athens itself struggled to maintain it. Wars with Sparta weakened the city. Corruption, internal conflict, and the rise of powerful leaders often pushed democracy to the edge of collapse. Eventually, when Macedon and later Rome rose to power, the direct democracy of Athens faded. Yet, the idea that government could belong to the people did not die. It went underground, preserved in texts, whispered in philosophy, waiting for its moment to return. Centuries later, when Renaissance thinkers rediscovered the works of Greece, the idea of democracy sparked again. By the Enlightenment, it had become a flame. America's founding fathers looked back to Athens as inspiration when they drafted the Constitution. France, too, during its revolution, evoked the spirit of the Greek assemblies. Of course, The modern democracies we know today are different representative rather than direct, but the DNA of Athens still runs through them. Now, pause for a moment and think, if you had been in Athens, would you have stood in the assembly, raising your hand, shouting your opinion, voting on the fate of your city, or would you have preferred someone else to decide for you? This is where ancient democracy challenges us. It wasn't about watching from a distance. It demanded action, voice, responsibility, and that question still matters today. How involved should ordinary people be in shaping their governments? But the legacy of Greece goes even further. Beyond politics, it gave us the very language of democracy. Words like politics, citizen, and democracy itself, demos meaning the people, kratos meaning power. Power to the people. A phrase so common today that we almost forget how radical it once was. And yet, we must remember, democracy is not unshakable. Athens reminds us that even great experiments can fall. Democracy can be fragile, threatened by war, corruption, or apathy. The Athenians believed it survived only if citizens actively protected it. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson they left us, not just how to build democracy, but how to keep it alive. So, the next time you hear a political debate, cast a vote, or question a law, think back to that noisy assembly in Athens. Ordinary people, thousands of years ago, raising their hands to shape history. Without them, the world we know today might look very different. What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more.